Mount LeConte meets the sky at 6,593 feet. It's the third highest peak in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the pride of Sevier County. LeConte was first surveyed in 1850, but it wasn't until the early 1900s that W.B. Townsend recognized the worth of all those trees up there in the mountains and began the Little River Lumber Company in Blount County. The harvesting of trees created a boom industry in this area, and it brought in workers from all over the area. Several years after he had moved from Greene County into the Gatlinburg area, Andrew Jackson Huff began to capitalize on the boom. He built several sawmills. Often he had housed some of the workers temporarily in his home. But as his business grew, he recognized another opportunity when his home became too small to continue offering living space to colleagues. He built a small hotel nearby, grew it into a 100-room, 3-story business known as the Mountain View. Following Huff's lead, some of the other logging camps, most notably Elkmont, began to evolve into tourist hotels. The mountains were a busy place. Meanwhile, Andy Huff's young son, Jack, was growing up in the hospitality business, helping his family as the Mountain View Hotel expanded. However, Jack also had a major love of the outdoors and hiking in the mountains. He's said to have celebrated graduating from high school by making his first climb up to the top of Mount LeConte. That, he said, was a life-changing experience. That was about 1920 or so. Young Jack was hooked on hiking and was thrilled with the views from the top of Mount LeConte. He realized, though, that view was being threatened by the logging business. Growing up in the hospitality business, Jack dreamed of one day being able to share these gorgeous views with tourists. Another young man, Paul Adams from Knoxville, also loved the serenity of the Smokies and the views from LeConte. Adams frequented LeConte and wanted to see the woodlands of the Smokies preserved too. All of this was at a time conservationists were questioning the clear-cutting of the Smokies and were raising public awareness with talk of turning the Smokies into a national park. When the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Association was formed, Paul Adams was named the first caretaker of LeConte in 1925. He immediately began turning his temporary abode into a camp to welcome dignitaries and others in his push to preserve this high frontier. It's said that when he took in $36 from some hikers who had spent the night at his camp, that was the historic beginning of the LeConte Lodge. The next year, the Great Smoky Mountains Conservation Association replaced Adams. They hired Gatlinburg native Jack Huff, who continued Adams' dream and built the first cabin. With the exception of the rocks and logs, all of the other materials for the construction of that cabin were carried up the trail by Jack, and that included a 150-pound cook stove. About 3,500 hikers visited LeConte in 1926. That's about 20 a month. 500 hikers more than that were even added the next year. They topped over 5,000 at Camp LeConte in 1929, or about half a dozen overnighters per week. As he sang the praises of the LeConte views, his semi-disabled mother made a wish that someday she'd love to see the sunset from the top of LeConte. Enough said. In 1929, the 25-year-old Jack set out about making a wooden straight-back chair with arms. Then he added a rest for his mother's feet, and then leather straps. He had his 97-pound mother sit in the chair, and with help, strapped it onto his back and began the trek to the top of LeConte. He headed out on what we believe now is the Trillium Trail. Mrs. Huff insisted on carrying her small kitten on her lap all the way to the top. Nothing's changed much since then. It's still a 7-mile, very steep hike up the rugged mountain trail. But Jack is said to have made that whole trip in 5 hours that day, stopping only when his mother asked to rest. LeConte Lodge is notable for being the highest inn providing lodging for visitors in the eastern United States. When Jack married Pauline in 1934, she joined him in the hospitality business, as did their children Philip and Cookie when they came along. The Huffs sold the LeConte Lodge in 1960, a year after building the Jack Huff Motor Inn in Gatlinburg. Jack Huff died in 1985 at the age of 92. It's estimated that he had hiked from Gatlinburg to the lodge at the top of LeConte more than 2,500 times. There is still no transportation to the lodge, and all guests must hike in on one of the 5 trails that access the mountaintop. Due to this lack of access, supplies that were once brought in by horses or mules are now brought in by a llama pack train. They do less damage to the trails. Currently, the lodge is maintained under a lease with the Smoky Mountains National Park Service. In closing, let me thank the scores of photographers, hikers, conservationists whose work has made vignettes like this possible. Having their work preserved is just a small part of what we do here at the History Center in the King Family Library. We hope to see you soon. We may be able to answer your questions on family search, too.